On the night I married into one of New York's richest families, the housekeeper locked my bridal suite door, tore my veil off with her own hands, and whispered, "Run through the service stairs if you want to stay alive." I thought she was mad, until I reached the garden, turned back, and saw flames bursting out of the room where I was supposed to spend my wedding night. That was the moment I realized I had not married into a family. I had walked into a trap. My name is Chloe Davis. 3 hours before that fire, I thought I was the luckiest woman in Manhattan. That is what everyone kept telling me anyway. Lucky girl. Lucky bride. Lucky daughter. I was marrying Julian Ashworth, the polished heir to an old New York family with money, property, charities, and the kind of last name people lower their voices around. My parents tried not to act too impressed, but I could see it in their faces. They believed I was stepping into safety, into legacy, into a future that looked expensive and permanent. The wedding was exactly the kind that makes strangers stop and stare. White roses everywhere. Crystal light on polished marble. A string quartet playing so softly it felt like the room itself was breathing. The guest list was full of judges, donors, board members, women in silk, men in tailored black. The Plaza Ballroom looked like something from a dream rich people have after they convince themselves they deserve every good thing that ever found them. And I was standing in the middle of it all, smiling until my cheeks hurt, believing I had been chosen. Julian knew how to play that role. He always had. He was calm where other men tried too hard. Never loud. Never vulgar. Never careless with his clothes, his words, or his temper. He remembered details people forgot. He asked my father about his back when no one else noticed he was in pain. He sent my mother lilies because she once mentioned roses made her sneeze. He made me feel seen in a way that was almost surgical. Like he had studied exactly where tenderness should go. Now I know there are people who do that not because they love you, but because they are measuring where to place the knife. Back then I did not know that. Back then I saw a man kneeling in front of me with a ring and a future. And I said yes. The reception lasted for hours. Toast after toast. Cameras. Laughter. Champagne. My bridesmaids hid one of my silver shoes as part of some old joke, and I remember laughing so hard I had to hold my dress up just to breathe. I remember Julian kissing my forehead and whispering that after tonight, no one would ever be able to hurt me again. I actually believed him. That may be the most humiliating part of this whole story. It was almost midnight by the time I was taken to the bridal suite at the Ashworth estate in Greenwich. The room looked unreal. Cream walls, gold trim, silk curtains, a massive 4-poster bed, candles, flowers, fruit, crystal water glasses. Everything arranged with the kind of care that says money has been controlling rooms for generations. I sat on the edge of the bed, finally alone, finally able to let my shoulders drop. I was tired, happy, overwhelmed, and maybe a little shy. I remember touching the lace at my wrist and thinking, this is it. This is the beginning. Then the door clicked shut. Not gently. Not like someone leaving. Like someone locking something in place. I looked up. Standing there was the head housekeeper, Elena. She had to be in her 60s. Sharp eyes. Tight gray bun. Black uniform. The kind of woman who moved quietly enough for people to forget she was in the room. Which usually means she had seen everything. Before I could speak, she crossed the room in 3 fast steps and grabbed my wrist. "Miss Chloe, hurry. Take off that dress. Right now." I stared at her. "Elena, what are you talking about?" She looked over her shoulder as if the walls might be listening. "No time. Change. Put on anything plain." I left the service door open. "You go down the back stairs, cross the garden, and run." My first thought was that she had lost her mind. My second thought was worse, because I looked into her face and saw no confusion there at all. Only terror. A real kind. The kind that does not perform. "What happened? Is there a fire? Did somebody break in?" She squeezed my wrist harder. "You ask later. If you stay, you may not get a later. Please. Trust me just this once." There are moments when your body knows before your mind does. A shift in the air. A wrongness. The sense that the room you are standing in has already chosen against you. That is what I felt. I ripped off my veil. My fingers shook so badly I could barely undo the back of my gown. Elena helped with the buttons. I yanked a white t-shirt and jeans from my overnight bag and dragged them on. I slipped into flat mules because they were the closest shoes I had. Elena pulled me toward a narrow side door hidden in the paneling. This leads to the service stairs. At the bottom there is a small door. I left it unlocked. When you get outside, turn right. Follow the gravel path. Do not stop. Do not look back. Do not let anyone see you. She pushed the door open. I looked at her one last time. Why are you helping me? Something twisted in her face. Because I could not watch it happen again. Again. That one word hit me so hard I nearly froze. But she gave me the smallest shove, and instinct finally won over confusion. I ran. The stairwell was dark, cold, and unfinished, like it belonged to a different house than the glowing mansion upstairs. My breathing echoed off the concrete. One of my mules slipped loose on the steps. I jammed my foot back into it and kept going. By the time I reached the bottom, my mouth tasted like metal. The little service door was there, barely open. I pushed through into the night. Cold air slapped me in the face. The back garden stretched ahead in patches of shadow and low lights. I turned right and ran down the gravel path exactly as she had told me. Halfway through, both shoes came off for good. And no, I did not go back for them. People love to imagine how rational they would be in a moment like that. They picture themselves pausing, making a list, gathering shoes, phone, pride, and clean logic. Real fear does not look like that. Real fear narrows the world to one command. Keep moving. So I ran barefoot. Sharp stones sliced into my feet. Branches scratched my arms. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it louder than the night insects. I made it to a huge oak tree near the edge of the grounds and bent over, gasping. Only then did I look back. The Ashworth mansion glowed in the dark like a jeweled animal. For one strange second, nothing happened. Then my bridal suite erupted in light. A blast of orange flashed through the upper window. Not huge, not enough to shatter the whole side of the house, but violent enough to turn my knees to water. A second later, smoke started pouring out in black sheets. Then the fire alarm screamed. I covered my mouth with both hands. That room. My room. The room I had been sitting in less than 2 minutes earlier. If I had ignored Elena, if I had laughed, if I had wasted another 30 seconds fighting with the buttons on my gown, I would have been inside that fire. Maybe dead. Maybe trapped. Maybe just burned badly enough for someone to call it a terrible accident and close the subject forever. Lights came on all over the estate. Figures ran inside, shouting. Doors banging. Someone yelled for extinguishers. Someone else yelled for the fire department. It should have looked like chaos, but from where I was hiding, what I felt was something colder. Not panic. Design. That fire had happened too cleanly, too precisely, in the exact room where the new bride had just been sent to wait. My feet were bleeding onto the grass. My lungs hurt. My brain felt split in two. One half was telling me to keep running until morning. The other half kept repeating the same phrase over and over. Again, because I could not watch it happen again. I was still shaking behind that tree when I heard rustling nearby. I almost screamed. Then a low voice whispered, "Miss Chloe. Are you here? Elena." I stumbled toward her. She took one look at my face and wrapped her worn cardigan around my shoulders. Even then, even while the house behind us still smelled of smoke, she did not waste time comforting me with lies. Come. Not here. She led me through the garden to a small tool shed near the rear hedge. Inside it smelled like dirt, damp wood, and fertilizer. She shut the door behind us and faced me in the dark. I grabbed her arms. Tell me the truth. What was that? Why did you say again? Elena, what is going on? For a moment she said nothing. Then she looked older than she had an hour earlier. The fire was not an accident, she said. And I believe it was meant for you. I stared at her. No, that makes no sense. Who would? Why would anyone? Her eyes did not leave mine. Your husband is not the man you think he is. Everything in me went cold. Julian. Elena nodded slowly. And his mother. I laughed once. Just once. Not because anything was funny. Because the mind will do strange things when reality tears too fast. You are saying my husband and his mother tried to kill me? On our wedding night? She pressed her lips together. I am saying I have worked in that house for 19 years, and I know when evil repeats itself. Then she told me about Isabel. Julian's first wife had died 3 years earlier. The official story was a rare illness, sudden complications. a tragedy the family preferred not to relive. I had seen her photograph once in the upstairs hall. Soft face, gentle smile. The kind of woman people call delicate after they are gone because it is easier than admitting how unprotected they really were. Elena said Isabel had been kind to everyone. She had also been isolated. Her own family had lost money. The Ashworths looked down on her. Julian had grown impatient with her. Eleanor had never hidden her contempt. One night, Elena passed the study and heard Julian and Eleanor arguing inside. "The time is now," Julian had said. And Eleanor answered this time, "Do not be careless." A few days later, Isabel was in the hospital with organ failure. Then she was dead. The doctors called it acute poisoning, Elena said. But no one ever pushed. The funeral was quick. Questions disappeared. Staff were told not to gossip. Life moved on. Except it did not move on for Elena. Because around the time Isabel died, Ashworth Holdings was in serious trouble. Debt. Failed projects. Lawsuits whispered about behind closed doors. Then, after an appropriate period of mourning, Julian began looking for a new wife. And then he found me. An only daughter. Wealthy parents. Clean reputation. Good breeding, as Eleanor once called it, in front of me. With a smile so bright I mistook it for warmth. I leaned against a shelf of gardening tools because my legs would not hold me up. "You think he married me for money?" Elena did not answer. She did not need to. The answer was in the fire still fading behind the mansion. In the way she had said again. In the speed with which she had moved to get me out. I covered my face. For maybe 10 seconds I wanted to run. Not just from the estate. From the truth itself. From the humiliation of it. From the idea that all the tenderness I had admired in Julian had been calculation. That every soft look and perfectly timed touch might have been part of a financial strategy. Then another thought came, and it was hotter than fear. If I ran now, they would still be there tomorrow. Still rich. Still respected. Still dangerous. And Isabel would remain a story told badly by people who had already buried her twice. I lowered my hands. "No," I said quietly. "No. I'm not leaving like this." Elena's face tightened. "Miss Chloe, please. Those people are capable of things you have not even imagined. I believe that now. Then go. Tonight. While you still can." I looked straight at her. If I disappear, they control the story. They say I panicked. They say I fled. They say the fire was an accident and I was emotional. They keep the house. They keep the name. They keep doing what they do. My voice shook, but only once. "I am going back in." She stared at me like I had lost my mind. Then very softly she said, "If you do that, you must become better at acting than they are." I nodded. That was the first honest wedding advice I got all night. By dawn, Elena and I had a plan. She would go back first and see how the house was moving. I stayed in the shed and made myself look worse than I felt. Dirt on my cheek. Hair tangled. Eyes rubbed red. When she returned, she said the fire had been contained mostly to the suite. The family was trying to avoid scandal. And the police were already there asking questions. "Good," I said. She looked at me with disbelief. "Good. If they think I remember clearly, they will clamp down. If they think I am shocked and confused, they may relax." Elena shook her head once, almost in pity. "You really are staying?" "Yes." "Then let us pray you win." I walked out onto the lawn just as the first gray light spread over the estate. I made sure someone saw me before I collapsed. A gardener shouted. More footsteps thundered from the house. Julian got to me first. "Chloe, my God. Where were you? I thought I had lost you." He dropped to his knees and pulled me against him. And I let him. That was the beginning of my performance. I went stiff in his arms and started crying at exactly the right moment. "There was a fire," I whispered. I was scared. I ran. I do not remember much after that. Eleanor rushed over. Hands clasped against her pearls. "Poor child. Poor child. It was just an electrical problem. The wiring, they think. Such dreadful luck. Just an electrical problem." I looked up at her through tears. "Really? I thought I smelled something strange." Julian's hand paused against my shoulder. "Only for a second." But a second is a long time when somebody is checking whether you know too much. Eleanor recovered first. "Fires smell like many things, darling. Burnt wood. Fabric. Smoke. You were terrified. That is all. The police asked questions. I answered like a woman in shock. Confused. Incomplete. Frightened. I told them I heard the alarm, ran, fell, blacked out, wandered outside, and remembered almost nothing. Julian and Eleanor watched every word like my mouth was a live grenade. When the officer mentioned that the fire department's first impression was faulty wiring, both of them relaxed in a way that would have escaped anyone who did not already know to look. I noticed. And from that moment on, so did they. They became kindness itself. Julian personally cleaned the cuts on my feet. Eleanor held my hand and blamed herself for not ordering more maintenance on the estate. Their concern was almost elegant. That was the worst part. Bad people are easier to survive when they are careless. These two had manners. But beneath all that grace, I could feel the pressure. Did I know? Had I seen anything? Why had I escaped? Who had helped me? So I gave them what they wanted. A bride who seemed grateful, frightened, and still desperately in love with her husband. When Julian came close, I flinched once, then apologized as if I felt guilty for hurting his feelings. When Eleanor suggested I rest in a guest room for a few days, I thanked her with wet eyes. At breakfast I barely ate. At lunch I asked whether the bridal suite would ever look normal again. At dinner I leaned slightly toward Julian, as if trauma had made me need him even more. Predators trust dependency. I knew that now. But I also knew I could not fight them alone. The first person I called was my cousin Mia. It was just after 6 in the morning when I finally locked the guest room door and used the bathroom tap to muffle my voice. Mia answered like a normal person who thought she was receiving a ridiculous call from a newlywed. "Chloe, why are you calling me at dawn? Shouldn't you be?" "You know." I interrupted her. "I am in serious trouble." That woke her up. Within a minute, I told her enough to change her breathing. Elena. The fire. Isabel. The way Julian and Eleanor had watched me with worry that felt less like love and more like inventory control. When I finished, Mia cursed so hard I almost laughed. "I'm coming there right now," she said. "No. Do not come." "Why not?" "Because if I suddenly have family show up, they will lock everything down. I need you outside. Quiet. Invisible." Mia inhaled sharply. "What do you need?" "2 things. Find out how Julian's first wife really died. Not the public story. The real one. Hospital records if you can. Staff if you cannot. And dig into Ashworth Holdings. Debt. Creditors. Lawsuits. Anything ugly." Her answer came fast. "Done." Mia was brilliant, reckless only when someone she loved was in danger, and very good with systems people assumed were safe because they cost money. She had gone through MIT like a storm in designer boots. If there was rot in Ashworth Holdings, she would find the smell. After that call, the war split into 2 fronts. Mine was inside the mansion. Hers was everywhere else. For the next 2 days I lived in costume. I smiled carefully, spoke softly. Let Julian think his tenderness was working on me again. Let Eleanor think her soothing little speeches were calming me down. I even let the household see me grow more dependent, asking where Julian was, looking relieved when he entered a room, falling asleep on the sofa once with my head near his shoulder so the staff could report back exactly what they were meant to report. You learn fast when the wrong facial expression can cost you your life. You also learn how exhausting survival is. People imagine bravery as sharp and clean. It is not. Sometimes bravery is nodding while the man who tried to burn you alive asks if you would like more tea. Sometimes it is swallowing your disgust because vomiting would be too informative. Sometimes it is lying very gently. The first break came on the 3rd afternoon. Julian got a call from the office and left in a hurry. An hour later, Eleanor dressed for a spa lunch and went out too. The house went quiet. I had already noticed something about Julian's study. He did not let staff clean it. Not even Elena. Men like Julian trust locks the way children trust blankets. Which usually means the room matters. I took my chance. I walked past the study once to listen. Nothing. Tried the handle. Unlocked. That surprised me enough to scare me more. I slipped in and shut the door. Mahogany desk. Leather chair. Built-in shelves. Computer asleep. A room arranged to look respectable and inherited, which is a style I have come to distrust. I moved fast. The desk papers were boring on purpose. Contracts. Proposals. Investor summaries. Clean. Too clean. Most drawers were locked. One held only pens and sealed envelopes. Then I checked a small side cabinet and found an old leather briefcase pushed to the back. Inside, under 2 magazines, there was a folded packet. Insurance. I opened it. My name was on the policy. Chloe Davis Ashworth. The beneficiary was Julian Ashworth. The amount was $10 million. The effective date was the day before our marriage registration became official. For a second, the room tilted. I sat down hard in Julian's chair and stared at the page until the numbers stopped blurring. 10 million. Not romance. Not protection. Not a symbolic policy a husband might mention in some dull planning conversation. A secret policy. Huge one. Quietly taken out on the woman he had just married. My hands went cold. There it was. Not proof of arson by itself. Not a signed confession. But motive had just become physical. Printable. Measurable. Preserved in a neat legal packet in a room no one else was allowed to touch. I took photos of every page. Then I put it all back exactly the way I found it. That evening, I could barely look at Julian without seeing a number floating over my own body. 10 million. That was the valuation. The amount he thought my death could produce cleanly. And somehow the knowledge made me calmer. Because once evil stops pretending to be abstract, you can begin to corner it. The next piece came from Elena. That night she knocked on my guest room door holding a glass of warm milk, the way older women in large houses have hidden messages inside ordinary gestures. When I let her in, she set the glass down and unwrapped something from a handkerchief. A blackened metal fragment. Half melted. A scrap of plastic still stuck to it. I frowned. What is it? I do not know for certain, she whispered. But my son is an electrician. He once showed me parts from time-switching devices. This looks like one of them. I found it in the ashes near the window frame before anyone else came in. I took it from her carefully. It was small. Ugly. Easy to dismiss. Which is what made it powerful. Truth is often not dramatic when it first appears. Sometimes it looks like burned junk in an old woman's palm. A timer? I said. Or a remote igniter, she said. Something that should not have been there. I slipped it into a plastic pouch from my makeup bag and hid it inside the lining of my suitcase. Now I had motive and method beginning to touch. The marriage. The fire. The policy. The fragment. And all of it sat under the shadow of one dead wife. Mia called the following afternoon. The moment I saw her name, my body went rigid. I locked the door and answered. Tell me. Her voice came in low and hot. Chloe. They are worse than we thought. She had dug into court filings, creditor records, private debt suits, and asset freezes. Ashworth Holdings was drowning. Not just strained. Not just going through a rough patch. Drowning. Banks. Private lenders. Bridging loans. At least one predatory creditor circling close enough to smell collapse. Then she told me about Isabel. Officially, the hospital listed multiple organ failure after acute poisoning. But the toxicology paperwork was incomplete, strangely vague, and the internal handling of the case looked rushed. Mia tracked down a nurse who had been on shift that night, now living 2 states away. The woman had quit soon after Isabel died. She told me as she once overheard Julian and Eleanor arguing outside Isabel's room. Did you use the wrong dosage? Why is she still breathing? I closed my eyes. Mia kept going, her voice shaking with disgust. The nurse never reported it. She was terrified. But she remembered every word. I leaned my forehead against the wall. So they did this before. That is what it looks like. The room was silent for a second. Then Mia asked the question she had been carrying since the call began. Are you ready to go to the police? Not yet, I said. Chloe, listen to me. We have motive. We have a pattern. We have physical evidence from the fire. But I need them to say too much. I need them careless. Mia exhaled slowly. You have a plan. I looked at the closed door. I am going to give them exactly what they think they married me for. That chance came sooner than I expected. 2 nights later, Julian came home with tension all over him. Not outwardly. He was too polished for that. But I noticed what stress did to him when he forgot to perform. His jaw set harder. He checked his phone too often. He drank water like a man trying not to drink whiskey. At dinner, Eleanor asked two leading questions about business trouble. Julian gave the kind of vague answer meant to sound masculine and burdened. Significant pressure. Temporary issues. Some creditors being unreasonable. I let him speak. Then I lowered my eyes and said the line I had prepared in my head all afternoon. Julian, why did you not tell me things were this bad? He looked up fast. I wanted to protect you, he said. Of course you did. I reached for his hand. We are married now. We should face these things together. I could feel Eleanor watching me so hard it was almost physical. I took a breath and said my parents set up a trust for me years ago. Between that and my own accounts, it should be close to 10 million. Maybe a little more. It is not enough to fix everything, but maybe it could relieve the urgent pressure. For half a second, both of them forgot to be human. That was how I knew. A flash of pure appetite moved across Julian's face so quickly most people would have missed it. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Her pupils widened. Not with gratitude. With acquisition. Then the mask slid back on. Chloe. Julian whispered. Are you serious? You would do that for me? I gave him the softest smile I could manage. You are my husband. Eleanor stood and came around the table to hug me. My sweet girl. I always knew you had a good heart. Yes, I thought. That is exactly what hunters say when the prey walks closer on its own. Out loud I said, I hate seeing you suffer. If this can help, then it should. Eleanor moved too fast after that. Then you and Julian should go to the bank tomorrow. First thing. There is no reason to delay. No reason to delay. Julian nodded, eyes bright now. She is right. Let us settle it quickly. I almost admired their greed for making my job easier. That night, after dinner, they were so warm with me it became grotesque. Julian kissed my temple. Eleanor told a maid to bring me dessert. They had already started behaving like people who believed the future belonged to them again. I went up to my room, locked the door, and took out the small voice recorder I had bought years ago for business meetings. The battery was full. I turned it over in my hand and reviewed the chain one more time. Motive. The debts. Target. Me. Method. The fire. Pattern. Isabel. Opportunity. Tomorrow. All I needed now was arrogance. The next morning, I slipped the recorder into the inside pocket of my coat and made sure the microphone faced up. Then I joined Julian downstairs. He looked almost cheerful. That terrified me more than anger would have. On the drive to the bank, I let silence sit between us until he filled it himself. You do not know what this means to me, Chloe. I turned slightly toward him. You never have to hide things from me again. He sighed like a man being saved. I did not want you involved in all of this. It has been a nightmare. A nightmare, I echoed. Yes. These past few years have been one disaster after another. Investors, lawsuits, people panicking over temporary setbacks. And after what happened with Isabel, I swore I would never let private family pain become public theater again. There. I said nothing. When people believe they are finally safe, they keep talking. He glanced at me. You understand that, do you not? Some women are simply not built to handle pressure. They collapse. They make trouble worse. My fingers curled around my handbag. And some men, I said quietly, see that as useful. He laughed. Lightly. Carelessly. You are different. That is why I chose you. Chose. Not loved. Chose. I looked out the window so he would not see the change in my face. At the bank, the transfer itself did not go through that day. A trust that size required signatures, a verification delay, and coordination with my family's office. Which was exactly what I had expected. I had not brought them there to hand over money. I had brought them there to make them believe I would. The real gift came afterward. We stopped at a private club restaurant because Eleanor insisted we mark the beginning of a brighter chapter. She arrived separately, all pearls and relief, and by the second glass of wine she was talking too freely. I had placed the recorder in my handbag now, open enough to catch voices. Julian leaned back, loosened for the first time since the wedding. I told you she would be easier than the last one, Eleanor murmured. Julian smirked. Let us not discuss old mistakes here. Old mistakes. Eleanor lowered her voice. If the transfer clears and the insurance matter is still secure, we may finally breathe. My pulse slammed against my throat. Julian said the policy is fine. And after the wedding night mess, no one is looking in the right direction. They still want to call it faulty wiring. Eleanor clicked her tongue. That maid was the only variable I did not account for. I almost stopped breathing. Julian answered in the same calm tone. He once used to ask whether I preferred still or sparkling water. Then we deal with variables when needed. A waiter approached. Conversation broke. My heart was shaking the recorder along with my body. It was not a courtroom confession. It was not a signed statement. But in context, together with everything else, it was enough to tighten the net. That night, back in my room, I played the recording 3 times. On the 4th, I stopped hearing their voices as personal betrayal and started hearing them as evidence. The next thing I did was call Detective Miller, the officer who had spoken to me after the fire. I did not tell him everything over the phone. Only enough. I have new information about the fire in my bridal suite, I said. And I believe it connects to financial fraud and the suspicious death of my husband's first wife. There was a pause. Then his voice changed. Can you meet? Yes, but not at the house. We met the next morning in a quiet office, attached to a private security firm downtown. I brought the insurance photos, the metal fragment, the recording, Mia's notes, and every observation I had written down from memory. Who said what, when, where, in what tone, after which trigger. Detective Miller did not interrupt much. That was how I knew he was taking me seriously. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, Mrs. Ashworth, you may have just changed this from a fire inquiry into something much larger. Good, I said. I would like it to become larger. He almost smiled. What do you need from us? Not just arrests, I said. Witnesses. I want them exposed publicly. They have lived too long behind reputation. That was the only selfish thing I asked for. Maybe selfish is not the right word. Maybe honest is better. The plan we built was simple on the surface. I would invite a small circle of family contacts and Ashworth business people to a private evening gathering at the estate to celebrate what Julian believed was the incoming transfer. A toast. A little relief. A chance for everyone to see the loyal young wife standing by her husband. What Julian and Eleanor would not know was that Detective Miller and 2 plainclothes officers would be there among the guests. Ready to move once I triggered the reveal. The day of the party I felt almost calm. That frightened me too. I wore navy instead of white. No diamonds from Julian. No sentimental jewelry at all. Just simple earrings from my mother, and the expression of a woman who had finally decided that shame belonged to the predators, not the person who survived them. Guests arrived just after 7. Board members. Neighbors. 1 old family friend. 2 men Julian had been trying to impress for months. Eleanor floated through the room playing gracious hostess. Julian stayed near me, occasionally touching the small of my back as if he still owned access to my body. Every time he did, I thought of fire. When enough people had gathered, he lifted a glass. Before he could begin, I stood. Actually, I said, there is something I would like to say first. The room quieted. Julian smiled at me with mild surprise. Of course, darling. I took my own glass but did not drink. A week ago, I began what I thought was the happiest chapter of my life. I married a man I trusted. I entered a family everyone told me to admire. And on the night of my wedding, I nearly died in a fire. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Julian's smile thinned. Chloe, this is not. I raised one hand. Please, let me finish. My voice did not tremble. The official story was faulty wiring. A terrible accident. Bad luck. Shock. Confusion. But the truth is, that fire was not an accident. And I know that because the woman who saved my life found part of the device used to start it. I held up my phone and displayed the magnified photo of the burnt fragment. Murmurs swept the room. Eleanor laughed too loudly. This is absurd. A burned piece of trash proves nothing. Maybe not by itself, I said. But perhaps this will help. I changed the screen. The insurance policy appeared. My name. Julian's. $10 million. Dated just before our marriage registration. This policy was taken out on my life in secret, I said. My husband was the sole beneficiary. The room went still. Julian stepped toward me. Chloe, you do not understand what you are looking at. No, I said. I understand it perfectly now. I looked around the room, making sure every face was turned toward me. You all believed I married into fortune. The truth is, I married into debt. Massive debt. The kind that makes desperate people do ugly things. Ashworth Holdings was failing. Creditors were closing in. And I was not brought into this family as a wife. I was brought in as an asset. Eleanor's face had gone almost gray. Stop this at once. I did not even look at her. There is more, I said. 3 years ago, Julian's first wife, Isabel, died after acute poisoning. Her death was buried under money and influence. But it was not clean. And it was not forgotten. Someone in the room whispered, "My God." Julian took another step. "You are hysterical." "No," I said. "I am documented." Then I pressed play. His voice came through the speakers I had quietly connected earlier that afternoon. "The transfer clears and the insurance matter is still secure. After the wedding night mess, no one is looking in the right direction. That maid was the only variable. Then we deal with variables when needed." No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Because this was the thing expensive people always forget. Once their own voices are in the room, money cannot talk over them fast enough. Julian lunged toward me. "You lying little." Detective Miller moved before he reached me. "Police. Do not move." Chairs scraped. Somebody gasped. Eleanor actually stumbled backward into the drinks table and sent 2 glasses crashing to the floor. 2 plainclothes officers closed in. Julian tried to twist free. For the first time since I had known him, his face fully broke. No charm. No restraint. Just rage. "You did this." He shouted at me. "You think anyone will believe?" "Believe what?" I asked. "The policy. The debt? The recording? The fire? Isabel?" Every word hit him harder than if I had slapped him. Eleanor started crying, then stopped, then started again when she realized no one was moving to comfort her. Detective Miller took out cuffs. "Julian Ashworth. Eleanor Ashworth. You are being detained in connection with attempted murder, suspected arson, insurance fraud, and the reopened investigation into the death of Isabel Ashworth." The clicks of those handcuffs were quieter than I expected. I had imagined they would sound triumphant. Instead, they sounded final. Julian kept staring at me as if he still could not understand how the prey had learned to bare its teeth. I walked closer just once. "You should have killed the mask before you killed the room," I said softly. "That was your mistake. You taught me where to look." They led him away before he could answer. The party dissolved into the kind of silence that follows public ruin. People avoided my eyes because witnessing truth makes cowards feel implicated. One woman touched my arm and whispered that she had always found Isabel's death odd. I almost told her that odd is a very expensive word to use when rich people bury women. But I was too tired. After the arrests, everything moved at the speed truth always should have moved in the first place. Bank records were subpoenaed. Internal company communications were reviewed. Isabel's case was reopened. The insurance policy was frozen. My family's attorneys descended like winter. Ashworth Holdings, once treated like an institution, started looking exactly what it had become. A rotting structure held together by fear, reputation, and borrowed time. I went back to my parents' house for a while. The first night there, my mother tucked a blanket around me on the sofa the way she used to when I was 10. I almost broke apart from the tenderness of it. Not because I was weak. Because when you have spent days smiling at people who want to destroy you, ordinary kindness feels enormous. A week later, I visited Elena. She was packing a small suitcase in the servant quarters. She planned to leave before the estate could transfer ownership or the lawyers began circling too aggressively. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the woman who had changed the direction of my life with one locked door and one whispered sentence. "I do not know how to thank you," I said. She turned and smiled sadly. "By staying alive." That nearly made me cry harder than the arrests had. Instead, I crossed the room and held both her hands. "You saved me twice," I told her. "First from the fire. Then from thinking I was crazy." She squeezed my fingers. "No, Miss Chloe. I only told you what you were already beginning to see. That is another hard truth no one teaches young women. The signs are often visible before the catastrophe. We notice the coldness in a smile, the wrongness in a pause, the care that feels too practiced, the affection that tracks value more than feeling. But we are trained to forgive discomfort if the man is polished enough, rich enough, admired enough, chosen enough. We call it nerves. We call it adjustment. We call it not wanting to ruin a good thing. Sometimes it is danger. Before Elena left, I arranged a private account in her name and made sure she would never have to work in a house like that again unless she truly wanted to. She protested. I insisted. Some debts should be paid. Some rescue should not be repaid with flowers and gratitude alone. As for me, I did not come out of all this shining. I came out exhausted, angry, embarrassed by what I had missed, haunted by what Isabel had not lived long enough to expose herself. There were nights I still woke up smelling smoke. Days when I heard Julian's voice in my head asking if I wanted still or sparkling water, and it made me physically ill that such ordinary memories could feel contaminated forever. Healing is not elegant either. It is repetitive, uneven, humbling, but it is still better than dying politely inside a beautiful house. People ask me now what lesson I took from all of it. They expect something simple. Trust your instincts. Do not marry for status. Money cannot buy character. All of those are true. But the real lesson is harder. Evil rarely arrives looking wild. It arrives groomed, educated, patient. It studies your loneliness, your hopes, your family's pride. It learns which version of itself you most want to love, and then it wears that version until the trap closes. And survival does not always look noble from the outside. Sometimes it looks like lying, acting, waiting, smiling 1 hour longer than your dignity can bear because you need one more clue, one more witness, one more mistake from the people hunting you. If anyone listening to me has ever felt ashamed for not leaving sooner, for not understanding sooner, for smiling while terrified because it was safer than screaming, I want you to hear this clearly. That was not foolishness. That was survival speaking the only language danger allowed. I used to think the worst thing a person could lose in marriage was love. I was wrong. The worst thing is reality. The moment you realize the person beside you does not see your heart, your mind, your life, or your future. They see your usefulness. And the second you stop being useful, their tenderness turns into accounting. That is what happened in the Ashworth house. A marriage had become a transaction. A wife had become an asset. A bridal suite had become a crime scene. But that is not where the story ended. It ended with the truth said out loud. With handcuffs. With reopened files. With one dead woman finally being named as more than a tragedy. With one living woman refusing to vanish quietly just because disappearing would have made the paperwork cleaner. If you take anything from my story, take this. Do not let anyone convince you that doubt is disloyalty when your life is on the line. Do not let elegance blind you. Do not ignore the moment your body knows before your pride does. And if the day ever comes when you have to choose between preserving a beautiful lie and exposing an ugly truth, choose the truth. It burns less in the end,